Hello, my name is Chris Sullivan. I'm the 12th HEU at Q8, and I'm here again with my good friend Anthony Lofaso. Thank you, Mr. Lofaso, for joining us.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem, no problem. I'd like to talk to you today about the Chiefs Association and how that got started. You were there for that beginning, and I'd like to know, tell us a little bit about how it got started and what were the forces behind it.
Well, I like to credit my friend John Doherty for starting the Chiefs organization because we had some minor grievances. There was no groundswell of upset or anger among the Chiefs. That's my recollection. There were a couple of minor issues that we had for several years wanted to cover. As an example, if you worked 100 hours the previous week in a snowstorm, and the following week you had to take your kid to the doctor, it would be taken off of your time. So these were little things that we thought we could work out internally. And we attempted for quite some time, including several meetings, to do that. And it wasn't coming to pass. I don't know exactly what John's thinking was at the time, but he was adamant against it, and he felt it was inappropriate for us to organize. In one final meeting, which was held on a Friday afternoon in the summertime, which is a really bad time for meetings, everybody wants to get away and go somewhere.
Do you think that's why they held it on Friday?
I think that's why he held it on Friday.
Okay, so he was aware of that.
Oh, of course, that was part of his purpose. And we got together there, and he made it clear that he was not going to be supportive of that and that he might even do things that would be difficult for us. So some of the old-timers who had maybe 10 or 12 years on John, when they were finally budged, we hadn't been able to budge them because we were much younger and they were, soldiers like I was, and we all were, and they were reluctant to do anything counter to the organization. They were devoted and dedicated to the organization. But after that particular meeting, most of the old-timers said, we've got to do something, we've got to form. And the following night, we met at Anton's on Springfield Boulevard, and very quickly we raised a tiny sum of money very, very quick. And knowing the animal, being one of the animals myself, it's hard to squeeze money from
Yeah.
some of these guys. We raised quite a bit of money. I don't want to say the figure, but it was adequate that we formed a committee consisting of myself and a couple of others. I'm reluctant to say other people's names because they may not want their name, but I was part of that committee. And we were a search committee looking for attorneys, and we interviewed a number of attorneys, excuse me, including Arthur Stryer, whose son now is very active in with the union, I believe, and representing sanitation workers, police officers, etc.
Right.
His father did the same thing, Arthur. And we settled on a woman by the name of Joan Keok. She was a labor attorney, and she had gained some decisions in New York City in the federal courts on what they call the Federal Wage and Hour Standard Labor Act. I think I may have had it backwards, but some combination of those words.
Right.
And we settled on her. And she was at that moment defending the EMS supervisors who weren't being paid overtime and weren't being granted leave and weren't accumulating accrued time, and lots of the work rules for them were such that you would make all your reports on your own time, but if you didn't get them in, you could be penalized.
Right.
So she was working on that, and we hired her. And from that point on, we had to go back and look at every occasion of violation of the Federal Labor Standards Act. I think it's FLSA or FSLA. And we had considerable number of violations, and they were all put together in a package and documented where we were deducted and so on. Basically what happened is that if you were designated a manager in the United States, you cannot have pay deducted from your salary for any day you actually worked. It cannot be deducted for the amount of time or the quality.
Okay.
You can be brought up for malfeasance, ineptness, and so I'm just talking about the law now, not the Department of Sanitation.
Right.
We came to find out that a lot of the rules that the City of New York had and the Department of Sanitation were in violation of federal law.
Wow.
And Joan knew that, when we spoke to her, we didn't know anything. We knew nothing. And she was a successful labor attorney in New York City, so she knew all of that.
Wow.
And we were still very reluctant. We didn't want to file a lawsuit.
Right. Oh, were you worried about the any kind of retaliation?
Yes, we were concerned about repercussions.
And is that why?
But I think the key reason was that we were soldiers.
Right.
The department meant a great deal to all of us. For the most part, most of us, when we came in the department, came from very little or nothing.
Right.
There were very few middle-class guys.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly everyone came from the lower class or poor class.
Right.
I think it's the opposite now. I think most of the people are from the middle class that joined the agency now. But in my time, that wasn't the case.
Right.
We were so glad to have that job, and that job had changed our life. And that's how we looked at it. And we didn't have resources outside of that. So we were reluctant. But again, we talked about it a lot. And finally, Joan persuaded us to file the lawsuit. Immediately, there were repercussions and threats and so on.
What kinds of things were they looking?
Demotion.
Oh, I see.
You would be demoted from your position to your last civil service rank. For me, it was a deputy chief or assistant borough super. That was the last civil service rank because I had taken an examination for that. And you can only be demoted from that by charges, and those charges have to be substantiated. And by law, they're reviewed by the court outside of the Department of Sanitation.
Right.
And these attorneys are a funny group. The trial commissioner doesn't want to constantly be overruled by the court, so he's not going to just make a decision because somebody whispers in his ear,
right,
or her ear, fix this guy, he's a pain in the ear. He's not going to do that.
Right.
You got to have the evidence not because he's a good guy, but because selfishly he wants his record.
Right.
He doesn't want to be known in the court as a guy that doesn't know the law.
Right.
So anyway, she persuaded us to file the suit, and we did file a suit. And then when the repercussions and threats came, and by the way, there were a number of people that were non-uniform who filed under we filed under Yorman 1, and that was the name for a man by Harold Yorman, who was a civil servant. I believe he worked in the Department of Personnel, and he had a lawsuit for his people.
Right.
And we filed under that lawsuit as part of the uniform. So a lot of civilians in our agency and other agencies filed what they call Harold Yorman 2, which was from a later date forward. We were from the oldest date, 5 years back. Harold Yorman 2 was 2 years back. Anyway, a lot of them withdrew from the suit because they were afraid. And the reason they were more afraid than we were probably is that they were in civil service. They were appointed. I would be dropped a couple of ranks, but I would still have my job, and they'd have to show that I did something really bad to take me from that rank. And there were some guys there that were at the highest mark. They were borough supers by civil service, and they really stuck in Doherty's side, to be honest with you. But they were good guys, and I want to be very clear. John was a very good guy, and to a large extent, most of us owe our careers to John. I don't want to be very clear about that.
So why do you think he could
have picked anybody? He didn't have to pick me or anyone else. There was no lack of talent in the Department of Sanitation, and I was fortunate that he picked me, and I was one of his guys.
Right.
No question about it.
So why do you think he went against you guys?
I think he had the same exact misgivings that we had, except he was on the other side of it. We felt just like that. We were reluctant to do it. We were reluctant to file it. We were reluctant to proceed with it. And I think that John, in his position, felt that exact same reluctance, except his responsibilities were different. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really think happened. I don't think it was like a personal thing. I think it was just the way it was. I can't say that if I was in John's position, that I may not have acted in the same way, because my view was that might have been for the benefit of the Department of Sanitation. Mm-hmm. And he was always operating, from all the time I knew him, from when we were kids all the way up, and when he was a foreman and I was a foreman, he operated for the benefit of the Department of Sanitation, to the best of his knowledge.
Right.
He wasn't one of these guys that I used to hear in the locker room when I was a Sandman, they hate the department, they can't wait to get off this fucking job. I'm sorry about the profanity,
right,
but I'm just reiterating guys how they talk. And they talk then, they talk like that now, So he wasn't one of those people. He was for the department. So it wasn't an alienation or an adversarial thing, although it appeared so. The long and short of it, because it is a long story, it took 12 years, that lawsuit. We won the first lawsuit in federal court. Judge Loretta Preska in the Southern District of New York ruled on our behalf. The city appealed that decision, because in civil matters you can appeal, like you can't appeal not guilty.
Right.
The district attorney would love if he could do that, to appeal not guilty from a jury, but he hasn't gotten that, thank God. Because I think the jury overrules the district attorney in my mind.
Right.
If you're an American, that's what I think. But anyway, they can appeal in civil actions, a non-criminal action. So they appealed it, and the 3-judge appeal panel of the Federal Circuit, I think it's the 9th Circuit here in New York, no, 2nd Circuit, they upheld the decision. So now we're in, and Joan's already talking with the city attorneys about, negotiating the payment, because it's supposed to be triple damages, etc., blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
Anyway, on the day of that decision, Judge Preska's decision, September 15th, 1993, an order came down from the Director of Personnel, and the 27 mayoral agencies had to change all their work rules to coincide with the Federal Standard Labor Act.
Because of your lawsuit?
Yes.
Wow.
All of those rules were changed. I have a copy of that at home. September 15, 1993, and they immediately complied with the federal court order. And you were now no longer allowed to, like if you're a so-called, what a lot of organizations do, not just the department, but a lot of private businesses, they try to designate everyone a manager, because everyone all over the world seems to know that you don't pay a manager overtime.
Right.
What they don't say is if a manager goes out and gets a haircut, you don't take money off his pay.
Right.
What you don't say, if the manager goes out and has a 2-hour lunch, he doesn't have anything deducted.
Right.
And, if he comes in 10 o'clock, you don't say anything. They all know that you don't pay overtime, but everyone's completely blind to the fact that all these other things are supposed to be in effect, and they weren't. But you can also, on the other side of that, you have to do a good job. If you don't do a good job, you can be removed from your position.
Right.
And that's fair. That's fair, because otherwise it would become like a joke, a scam, a scheme. You're supposed to be responsible.
Right.
But all these things were in place. So we had won the appeal, and then an appeal circuit in another part of the country, I believe in Kansas or Missouri, ruled against a sergeants association. So now you had the classic thing where the Supreme Court comes in. 2 circuits have opposite opinions about the same problem, same situation.
Right.
So the Supreme Court's going to rule. So this now, years are going by, like we're already 8 or 9 years now. So the Supreme Court won't hear the case and remands the case, and that's when I learned what that word means. It's remanded. It goes back down, and it is remanded to the lower court. It skips the appeal court, which is a 3-judge panel, and it goes back to the original jurist, which was Judge Loretta Preska. She still sits, by the way. She still serves.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was sent with the recommendation to view it in the light of the Kansas-Missouri decision.
Right.
So now she reverses and rules against us. Naturally, we appeal. And another period of time goes by, years, and the 3-circuit panel overrules Judge Preska and sticks to their guns with their initial upholding of the appeal the first time that the city appealed it.
Right.
So we're at that point, and enter Michael Bloomberg. And Michael Bloomberg is the mayor. He's the mayor like about, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, very brief time he's the mayor. And one day I get a call from Joan. They're going to settle the lawsuit. I says, what happened? It went. She says, no, I got a call. They're going to settle. She said, I don't know. So we found out however, but under the direction of Michael Bloomberg, you just don't fight it anymore, settle it.
Wow. And
we settled, and that lawsuit was $14-point-something million, of which I had my share. Because we all had to document 5 years of overtime.
Right. Was that hard to put together?
No, because the managers have timesheets, personal timesheets. We don't sign 57s.
Right.
And we can or cannot sign the blotter. At my rank, I could or could not. It didn't matter.
Right.
I didn't have to. It wasn't an imperative that I sign the blotter or not sign the blotter. But the timesheet you kept, and then those records were kept at 346 Broadway. So that all had to be put together. So for that period of time when the city was in violation, before September 15, 1993, when they changed their rules, from that period 5 years back, I worked thousands of hours.
Right.
I mean, we all did.
Right.
And didn't get paid. So we were paid for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge landmark decision.
It's a massive decision. The big legacy of that decision is the Uniform Sanitation Chiefs Association, which is now 25 years old, and the total change of work rules for the 27 mayoral agencies.
Wow.
And those 27 mayoral agencies are now have to be in compliance with the Federal Standard Labor Act. And there's a lot of details there, you know.
What was it like when you first put the Chiefs Association together? What was it?
They were of all the Chiefs Association consists of deputy chiefs, assistant borough supers, assistant chiefs, borough supers, and chiefs. We had a spot for the director, and we wasn't sure about that. That's the old chief of staff job, the guy who heads up the cleaning and collection, the 4-star.
Right.
And both 4-stars have been members unpaid dues since that time.
Mm-hmm.
Of all that group, and I believe it was about 100 of us, only 3 men wouldn't join.
Wow.
And they did join when we won the lawsuit. They joined.
Right.
All the 3 of them joined when we won the lawsuit. And then we won right behind that an additional 5% on the raises that everybody else got, because we invoked the Goldberg umbrella of 1971, when Arthur Goldberg, who had been an associate justice of the Supreme Court, and then he was the Secretary of Labor, and he was brought in to arbitrate the deadlock between the Uniform Sanitation Men's Association, and there was men at that time, not workers, Uniform Sanitation Men's Association, and the City of New York with John V. Lindsay. And he ruled that what we call the Parity Act, that sanitation workers would receive 90% of whatever police and fire received.
And that's still true today?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that it had diminished sharply. There was at one point that the 4-star chief of police was making about 120, and our guy was making like 87.
Oh, wow.
You know, so they really had fallen way off.
Mm-hmm.
And we made that move again, and it was successful. The city didn't fight it too hard because it was clearly documented.
Right.
And we were given an extra 5%. Norman Steisel, who had been the commissioner of sanitation, was the first deputy mayor, and under Mr. Dinkins, he basically ran everything. So with Steisel, you showed him the arithmetic, and he more or less, you know, he knew a lot about arithmetic. He knew a great deal about arithmetic. And showed a lot of guys in the sanitation department about it.
So those 3 guys that initially didn't, was it that they initially didn't join and then joined, or they joined and then they left?
No, they initially didn't join, and then they joined because we were successful.
I see.
They waited for, it's like guys who don't want to join the union.
Right.
You know, they still get the same benefits. They still get, and even when there's trouble, they call the union.
Right.
Even because they take a chance. The guy don't know you're not a member.
Right.
Because I don't know how many guys you got not paying dues now. I mean,
Why,
there never was a lot of guys.
What, there were guys out there that
they don't join the union. They don't pay dues.
I didn't know that you had that option.
It's an open shop.
Wow, I didn't know that.
This state is a right-to-work state.
Wow.
You can't hold someone out because they don't. Just like you can't stop someone from joining the union, technically.
Right.
You can't stop someone from not joining the union either.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought that you had to.
And because of the way the contracts are worded, the union is representing them too.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if the union has a record of who's. I'm pretty sure they know the guys that aren't members.
I'm amazed that there are any guys now.
Well, years ago, there was a guy that lived right behind Pete Scalatis. He lived in other words, here's my fence. We share the fence. Like, that's his fence. This is my yard. That's his yard. He lived right behind Pete Scalatis, and he wasn't a member of the union.
He wouldn't join, huh?
And, I mean, you got to be stupid. The president is right there. You got to be a jackass.
Right.
You got to be stupid.
Right.
I mean, it would be smarter to be a member and be with him all the way, whatever it had to be done.
Wow.
You know, be a loyal guy, and you got the president right there. Even if he don't like you, because of the wives, it's hard for him to deny you, you know, getting you the day off or change your chart or some pimple thing like that. It's just one of them things, you know. That's a long time ago, you know.
So, could you take us back to that initial meeting on that Friday afternoon? You know, a little
John,
bit
at Mr. Doherty's office?
Yeah, like how that initially started and...
Yeah, we had been going back and forth. I had gone to John by myself a few times, and initially he wasn't too upset. He was thinking about it in his mind. And then I had gone there with several other chiefs. Again, I'm reluctant to say their name.
Right.
Anyway, we talked with him, and then at some point he became adamant that he was not going to be supportive, he was going to be against it. And we finally had a meeting, what some guys call the showdown meeting, on a Friday afternoon in the summertime at John's office. And he got really mad. He got really upset. And some of the older guys, and I mean much older, guys that came on, forget me, these guys came on like after the war and before the war.
Wow.
I'm talking about the Second World War now, not the Gulf War. Okay, and these guys came on 46. They came off the Superman list. One fellow lived right here in Whitestone. He used to be president of the. He was president of the. I can't think now, but anyhow. They said, well, we have to do something, you know.
Wow.
I remember one guy saying, yeah, this kid's out of control.
Wow, that's funny.
Yeah, and but again, after the organization formed, we then began to have agreements with the city of New York. And
you think initially he took it personally in that meeting?
It's possible. He's such a professional. We had made it clear that it wasn't. He may have felt, it's possible he felt betrayed because he had a lot to do with making all of us. He didn't make any of those older guys. They were ahead of him. They were before him.
Right.
But he made most all of us was his input. You know, like I said over and over, and I'm not embarrassed to say it, John invented me. He didn't have to pick me. He could have picked anybody. I mean, I passed examinations up to a certain point. But from that point on, he could have made anybody from that group of guys that was capable.
And you were one of the vocal voices in that room?
Well, I was blamed for it. I was the instigator and the leader. But that's not true. There were several of us working together. And our only goal, and again, this started, we had no thought of a lawsuit, no thought of an organization, and no thought of anything, and this just evolved. We wanted to, when I was a young guy, sanitation worker in the Bronx and Harlem, the borough super was off all summer.
Right.
And what happened was that informally, the chief of staff used to say, well, we're going to make up for the snow, take a couple of weeks off. There was no paperwork, and we were looking for that. You know, like, in the summertime, I'm going to not come around for 4 or 5 days.
Right.
And that, don't make any big record, and there would have been no Chiefs Association.
You just didn't want somebody to be a stickler every time you had to do something and you left the job.
Right. Now, if it's snowing, I know that's not possible.
Right.
It's not possible.
Right.
It's very short of some catastrophe within your family, God forbid. It's not possible. It's not even possible for sanitation workers.
Right.
Because if everybody did that, there'd be no force to do what we're responsible to do. No, that's what happened. We kind of stumbled into it. There was no intent. We didn't say, hey, let's form an organization and let's sue the city. This just came about. It evolved. Our initial thing was just to have these minor things corrected. And it used to be like that. I don't know why it stopped being like that or how it happened, but I know that in the summertime, the borough supers had gone weeks at a time, and this had nothing to do with their vacation.
Right. And did you, when the Chiefs Association first started, were you part of the one of the chiefs that actually helped to organize it and get it going? Yeah.
I made the what they call the keynote speech.
Oh yeah,
at Anton's. Yeah.
And what was that speech like? What was the gist of that speech?
It's funny you should ask that because recently I spoke to a good friend of mine who was a deputy chief at that time, and I was 3-star chief. And he remembered better than I did that I said, we're all told we're lucky that we have this job, and that's very true. I said, but maybe some of us deserve it. Maybe some of us get up early in the morning. Maybe some of us go through all kinds of stuff just to get here. Maybe some of us stay 3-4 hours past the time, and we're concerned about the routes, the operation, the snow. And it struck a chord with a lot of guys, because I knew that every single guy in that room looking at me did that. Did that. There wasn't guys that laid low and slack and see if they can get away with it and then nobody sees me. There was nobody like that. There was not one assistant borough super or deputy chief or assistant chief. All John had to say was, they're going to be killing me on the corner of, go stand there and take that bullet. And the guy would have been in the car 60, 70, 80 miles an hour.
Wow.
That was the dedication and the devotion and the loyalty that he had. And I think he knew that. And I think that the fact that we were dealing with I think what happened was that possibly it was too late to go back to, let's just keep it informal and correct it. It was too late for everybody. Because at any point, if he said, yeah, okay, let's get that going.
Right.
All right, we'll work out a schedule. Even if he had to keep it, because I know John, he would have a record. You wouldn't just be he's going to call the Bronx and you're not there.
Right.
You decided not to be there. That ain't going to be.
Right.
You're going to have some kind of regulation, and we didn't have a problem with that.
Right.
Because I don't want people, when I pick up the phone, that I don't know you're not there.
But he pretty much already drew a line, and you drew your line.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen before. But the main thing of it is that the organization is there. It's made some great inroads. As you know, we used to have the Bridge and Express Highway organization, and everybody that didn't get paid overtime was a member of that group from 5 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the morning, and be back at 4:30, in the morning. So, so all of a sudden that the deputy chiefs were getting paid, and they're no longer part of the Bridge and Express Highway organization. I mean, they could be a member, but they're going to work 8 hours and go home. Ain't going to pay them overtime, because now they receive overtime. The deputy chief position and the assistant borough super position receives overtime.
Wow.
Overtime pay.
And like you said, that's what you consider the Chiefs Association was started by John Doherty.
John Doherty, more than any other man. Forget me, forget Chief
What was
Levin.
his position at the time?
He was the 4-star guy.
Okay.
Yeah. No. Then he went on. He was the first deputy commissioner. Okay. He started when he was 4 stars, the conversations.
What was the commissioner's position on all this at the time?
The commissioners that we had at that time wasn't even involved. They were from the clubhouse, from the circuit.
Right.
They were from the political machine.
What do you?
There wasn't really, they can't really make a call. They'd have to rely entirely on the recommendation from John or people like me about any of those problems. The political problems, closing the landfill in Staten Island, moving the garage from Fresh Meadows to Jackson Heights, those things the commissioner's involved in, the civil matters. These internal matters, they would just take the guide from City Hall.
Right.
If City Hall's against it, they're against it.
So he definitely had the power to really push it and make it happen that the system was changed.
Internally.
Right.
Yeah, he could have done that. He didn't have to ask anybody.
Right.
He didn't have to ask anybody. We just have to make an accrued time sheet and operate off the accrued time.
Wow.
And that the accrued time had to be used by the end of the year, separate from the other time that you might be accruing, the official accrued time. And, we used it up by the end of the year. And most of the guys never used it up, and you lost it. But they didn't care, because you had an opportunity to use it to the extent that you could, So it was really, there were a lot of other details and things there, but generally speaking, we didn't have an intention. Eventually, under the guidance of the attorney, it evolved that we had to do that, because it didn't seem we were going to get it corrected. And eventually it was corrected to the extent that it changed all the work rules for 27 mayoral agencies in New York City.
Yeah, that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, and it took 12 years, and I believe that Joan was paid very well, because we also were awarded court costs.
And what was Arthur Streyer's role in this?
Arthur had no role at all. We had interviewed him. The search committee,
I see.
We interviewed Arthur. Arthur was well known, had represented quite a few people that we knew.
Right.
But when we spoke to Joan, she was so knowledgeable. We didn't know the existence of the Federal Standard Labor Act,
right.
Federal Labor Standard Act, whatever it is, FSLA. We didn't even know the existence of it, and she educated us. And looking back at it, she might have been smart enough to know this is a winner,
right.
and I'm going to get paid a lot of money.
Right.
but it backfired on her too because it took 12 years. You know how many copies an attorney makes in 12 years?
Oh,
how
God, I
how
can't
many things
imagine.
how many things they mail out? How many times they go to court? How many times they write a brief? How many times they make a motion? How many times they withdraw or enter a petition in 12 years?
And this kept getting bounced back and forth.
Oh, this was ongoing. And at one point, it was the only thing she was doing.
Wow.
She was only doing it. That was nothing else. I don't know what her pay was, but she waited 12 years. She wasn't getting. I mean, we gave her money as we went along, but nowhere near. And then it became tough. So it reminds me now. About 5 years into it, we needed another $200 each. Well, it was like the last scene in an Errol Flynn movie where we sword fighting with Basil Rathbone, like that. Getting the 200 out of these guys, it's tough.
Because they didn't see the long-term benefit maybe
Well,
working
I
out?
think that there was many highs and lows during the 12-year period.
But that happens during court battles, right?
Right. But it had gone on too long. We
Right.
won, lost. And now here we were again with the court is going to go back up to the Supreme Court. And the court has got all conservatives by that point. And we figure that, that's it. They're not going to rule for an employee. Republican appointees don't rule for employees. That's historically they don't rule they always rule for the company or the business.
Right.
And they make it some kind of reason like it benefits the employee, but it doesn't. The employee gets screwed.
Right.
So, anyway, long story short, most of the guys were disillusioned, and I was very discouraged myself. I won't deny it. So was Joan. We were very discouraged. We were at like 10 years at that point when that decision was hanging in the balance again.
And you didn't think it was going to come to favor you?
No, we had won twice, and that wasn't enough. And the city wasn't letting go. And I guess that it was a variation in the opinion of Mr. Giuliani and the opinion of Mr. Bloomberg and their advisors. And that's clearly what it was. When Mr. Bloomberg came in, he had his own corporation counsel. I'm sure they reviewed the various lawsuits that were before them and which ones were worth the time of the corporation counsel and which ones weren't. And nobody was more surprised than us.
I know there's a decision out there now that the officers, the 444 officers, are fighting right now, and it's going back and forth through different arbitrators for the decision of whether or not the supervisors should get their sections back. So
yes, that's a very. I hope they do, because I'm dedicated to the Department of Sanitation here in New York City, and the sections are part of the city charter. Taking the sections away from them had a tremendous impact on morale. I'm not so certain what cost saving is involved.
right.
I think it was a real desperation cost savings. How does it work now? There is no more section, so what does the officer do? Well, how is the officer assigned now?
I'm not really sure. I know that he has a lot more responsibilities, a lot more trucks that he has to look
So,
over.
and that was broken by contract because the span of control used to be 6 crews.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what did they reduce the number of supervisors?
Yeah.
And one supervisor has a lot of trucks, and there's no section boundary?
I think there's still sections by boundaries, but I don't think that there's a limit on how many trucks he could watch, or it's like really increased the amount of responsibilities.
And all the payrolls are centralized now? There's no more section payroll?
And
All
more
the payrolls
section
are at the garage?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah?
I don't think so. Is there any more section payroll?
There's still section payroll.
No.
There is no section.
No.
It's all because it would have to be if there's no section officer, because someone's got to be accountable.
Right.
So you can't have a section payroll and no one's accountable. You can't just have it.
But it just keeps getting bounced back, from arbitrator to this guy to that
Is this
guy.
in court or is this in negotiations?
I think it's in the arbitrator has it, and
Yeah.
And now I think it's in a 4-judge panel has it right now, and they all have to agree. Otherwise, it keeps getting bounced back, and they have to, keep deciding this over and over again until all 4 judges agree on it. I don't know if it was originally a 5-judge panel and one of them isn't around right now or what, but I just know that, these supervisors are not too happy.
Is it before the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board?
I'm not sure.
Because there's a panel there.
I just know that this decision is being bounced back and forth, like you were describing with the with your lawsuit, and
there's no money involved there. This is just a question of work rules.
Right.
I know that in the city charter, when Colonel Waring was the commissioner back in the 1890s, he got those incorporated. He put the districts and the sections and the district superintendent and the section foremans into the city charter when we created the new Department of Street Cleaning, and also the general superintendent that the district superintendents would report to, and the general superintendent's assistants. So that was basically the structure that we have now. You have foremans and sections, supers and districts, and then you had a general superintendent. At that time, they were just talking about Manhattan, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. No, not Brooklyn. Manhattan, the Bronx, and Staten Island.
Okay.
Brooklyn and Queens were absorbed in the department in January 1st, 1898 with the Greater New York Act. Brooklyn and Queens was not part of New York City. They were separate entities. That's when they created Nassau County.
Okay.
There was no Nassau County. There was Queens County and Suffolk County. In the Metropolitan Act, which is in the state legislature, on January 1st, 1898, Brooklyn and Queens, the western portion of Queens, became part of New York City. The eastern portion of Queens became Nassau County.
Wow.
And not part of New York City. And Suffolk County remained Suffolk County at...
When did Queens as a whole become part of New York City?
January 1st, 1898. The western part of Queens.
Right.
The eastern part of Queens is called Nassau County.
Oh, I see.
There was no Nassau County. There was no Nassau County.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
In 1898, they divided Queens almost in half and called the eastern half Nassau County.
I didn't know that Nassau was originally eastern part of Queens. That's it.
Yeah, Queens. There was just two counties there. There was Queens County, Suffolk County, and Brooklyn, which is all on
see. I
Brooklyn is also on
saying.
Long Island too. People don't look at it that way, but Brooklyn's part of Long Island.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the body itself.
Exactly.
Right.
So they were absorbed, and we had 5 boroughs from that point on. The Bronx, of course, was absorbed much earlier. 1874 became part of New York City, but the other ones didn't come till 1898. So that structure that we're talking about with the general superintendent, his assistants, the supers, and the foremen is all in the city charter. I don't know how they worked that to eliminate sections. I'm not sure if they've eliminated the sections or if they've changed the span of control.
I'm not sure myself. I just know that it's dragging on, and every time you think it's gone one way, they come out with, well, we have to meet again, and, this will be the final decision, and it keeps getting postponed and postponed. And
where do the officers report?
They still report to the garage.
And is there like a lesser number of officers compared to before?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know exactly the breakdown of it. I'm in the garage, and I don't really pay that much attention to that. I just know that they're complaining all the time about the amount of stuff that they have to watch and that they're responsible for. And I don't believe that that's right. If it's in the contract, then the city goes against the contract. So.
Well, that's why, having been on both ends of the stick, kind of being with the union for a long time, being part of the committee, it's always been a struggle. Everything that we have, we struggled for. And sometimes when I used to hear people take it for granted, I used to get upset. Some people have said that I have a temper. I'm not aware of it, but people have said that I have a temper. But there are a lot of things wrong, and there are days when you could find it frustrating, but it's a darn good job for people that, like a guy like me, I went there with nothing. I brought nothing there.
Right.
No education, no skills, no training,
Me
nothing.
Too. I consider myself very lucky.
Zero. And I was able to make something of myself. So, we've had to fight for everything. We fought for the pension. It took a long time to achieve the pension. Then we lost it again. Then we got it again. Now I understand it's lost again, the 20-year pension.
Yeah, we got 22 and a half now.
Yeah, and there's always people at City Hall that sitting in the room one day and they come up with these things where they can save 50 cents on the back of the worker. And whether it's more efficient or not. Right now we have a great rat problem in Manhattan, and the answer is obvious. Because about 20 years ago, we reduced the collection in Manhattan and the rest of the city. Manhattan was 5 times a week, whether you needed it or not.
Right.
I love to use that expression because Now that it was 3 times a week, the tons per truck shift went up, the agreement with the union and tons per truck shift went up, and we became more efficient. But we're leaving out this enormous food supply, and the number of rats in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, and even in Queens, is way more than the regular population would be because you have the food supply. And there's such a thing as quality of life issues. I'm not familiar with the entire budget, but resuming 5 times a week collection in New York City would be a damn good idea for health purposes because you would reduce the number of rats dramatically.
Well, how many more billions of dollars would it cost to go to 5-day-a-week collection?
It wouldn't be billions, not even remotely. I think the number, in constant dollars, it was probably around $25 million because the savings back then was in the 20s millions of dollars was the savings.
Right.
And so whatever that is in constant dollars 15 years later because of inflation, I don't know the answer. I used to know that stuff, but I don't know that now.
Right.
But the reality is that it's the same thing with the landfill. I went to several meetings where people were very concerned what's going to happen to the seagulls. We had, pick a number, 10 million seagulls at Fresh Gills.
Right.
Well, that's not the natural population along that shoreline and coming around along by Woodbridge, New Jersey and stuff. Maybe a couple of thousand at the most. You're putting 20,000 tons of food supply that doesn't exist naturally. So they all died. The strongest ones survived and the rest are dead. And the same thing would happen with rats. A lot of these rats are born, live, and die just knowing that they're going to go to a pail and eat.
Right.
They didn't know about hunting. They didn't know about not eating for a couple of days. They don't know any of that stuff.
Right.
And if you withdrew that food supply suddenly, and it would be sudden, because all of a sudden the next day it's not there, you would be amazed at the number of rats that would be out of action. So I think that some kind of a number should be put on the value of that versus how much it costs to have 5 times a week collection. Of course, then the issue of efficiency. And then also the issue that we have to go a long way to the dump now. That's a consideration. Before, when the dump was right in front of you, so 5 times a week is okay. But now the dump is pretty far, so, you want to fill these trucks up that there's not a drop of room left. But I think that the rat issue has to be addressed. I think so. I think it's serious enough. Every so often you'll see a news show at 6 o'clock where they show the rats in the daytime. Operating in the daytime, and these are nocturnal creatures.
Right.
And there must be so many that their rooms and houses are so full, they got to come out in broad daylight.
Well, that's like now you see birds that hang around for the whole winter. They don't go down south like they used to because of the weather change.
Yeah.
So when conditions change, you see abnormal things.
Yeah.
But I would like to just wrap this up, and we will talk more about the landfill and all that on a future show. But I'd like to ask you, just to wrap this up, what is the basic purpose of the Chiefs Association now that that lawsuit is over? What was its primary goal? To look out for the benefit of the Chiefs and to protect their
well,
situation?
essentially it is to have a single voice for the representation of the Chiefs and to protect those ranks to the best of our ability. You see the assault on the officers' ranks. Right. And there's always people at City Hall that will say, you know what, my cousin isn't working right now. He could run a borough, and he'd do it for half the price that Sullivan is doing it for. Right. And so those ideas creep in. So we wanted to have an organization in position ready to make a very loud noise when that happens. Hopefully we'll be successful, because if we're successful, the people behind us have a path. If we're not successful, the people behind us, sanitation workers and officers, they'll suffer too. So we thought it was essential. Now, this evolved, by the way. This wasn't our thought when we
Right,
fought.
yeah, that's what I figured.
But at this point now, it's to have a single loud voice to defend these ranks.
Right.
And that we believe that they are professionally necessary. When there's a snowstorm, I think you would want someone, be it a man or a woman, we don't care that it's a woman, it doesn't mean anything, it's the same thing, that has a lot of experience about what to do with the people and the equipment when it's snowing in New York City. Right. Someone that knows a great deal about that and has done many facets of it over time, and not someone that has a degree from someplace. And we're not discounting degrees. We're just saying that experience is number one teacher. I won't mention names, but we had someone that was the commissioner of trials for the Department of Sanitation. The politics being whatever it was, she was moved over and she became the first deputy commissioner of the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an operating position.
Right.
First big fire, she goes there. Knows nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. She's an attorney. Well, a couple of weeks later, she was put someplace else.
Wow.
Now, you say, well, don't compare a fire to the Department of Sanitation. Department of Sanitation performs a lot of functions. Look at 9/11 and the functions of the Department of Sanitation during 9/11. The opening of those streets. We were the only organization that had equipment, manpower, training, supervision, and access, and opened those streets for all these other organizations. We removed hundreds of thousands of tons of material and took it and set up a system by the Hudson River to put that on our barges and take it to Fresh Kills and sort it at Fresh Kills. All critical functions done by the Department of Sanitation. So people, because of the product we deal with, which is garbage, people have discounted it for years, except really smart people like Lee Iacocca.
Well, I didn't have the privilege of serving the city when 9/11 happened, but I was around for Hurricane Sandy, and I saw how effective the sanitation department was.
Tremendous. You know? And to discount it and to poo-poo it and to demean it and reduce it and hurt it is wrong. It's wrong for the people of the city of New York, not just for the Chiefs Association. It's wrong for the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw many people testify that the only people they saw for days after Sandy was the Department of Sanitation.
Mm-hmm.
Every day and at night.
Yep.
And I've seen it in hurricanes, I've seen it in snowstorms, I've seen it in floods, I've even seen it around fires, and everyone saw it in 9/11. We got very little credit publicly.
You worked on 9/11 even though you were retired, right?
All of us did.
And what happened with that? You came in?
We just came in and offered our services to whatever we could do, whatever we could help, whatever position, answer the telephone.
And how long were you working down there after you retired? You came back to work?
Very short time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not long.
A few months or?
No, not even, no. Because the office had gotten moved to Queens.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Got moved to Queens. And some people stayed a lot longer than I did. It was really it was a terrific thing.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I think we've learned a lot today. So thank you, Mr. Lofaso, for joining me.
Thank you.